Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting, where today we've got a long requested video, one that gives a bit of extra clarification on how SRS tokens work in Dystopian Wars, because they can do quite a lot of things, and that's quite overwhelming for a lot of new players who are just starting out to just get a grasp on what it is exactly that they do. Now, to help with this, I've made a little bit of a flow chart for many different things that the SRS tokens can do, and I plan to end the video with a bit of video footage that I made of a simulated game. That wasn't a real one that we were doing, but where some of these situations that are handled in the PowerPoint presentation pop up. You might notice a bit of a drop in the audio quality though. It's recorded with the internal microphone of the camera, which isn't the best, but I'm having to make do with what I have, so apologies beforehand if you notice that. Now, on to the actual point of the video. When do you use SRS tokens? Well, SRS tokens are used during the special operations step of the SRS carrier that you're activating during the activation round. Now, before you start, you have to ask yourself, were there any SRS tokens already on a long-range sortie from a previous round, or if you opted to use the combat air patrol rule? If the answer is yes, then you can launch your SRS with essentially unlimited range to any friendly or enemy targets. Now, what they do once they reach those friendly or enemy targets will be handled in a bit. If the answer is no, they were not on a long-range sortie, then you can have one of three options. You can send the SRS on a long-range sortie, so that they can be used with unlimited range. However, that only happens in the next activation of said carrier, so you can send them out with the first yes rule. Or you can discard one of your tokens, if they were not sent out on long-range sortie, to replace your Victory and Valor card. You discard one per token that you discard, that you throw away, and then you can draw a new Victory and Valor card. This is through something called the SRS Recon flight rule, which I think virtually every normal SRS carrier has these days. Or, if they were not on long range sortie, you can still send them out to one of the following targets within 20" of the carrier. Now remember, the special operation steps happens before moving, so you have to be fairly up close and personal already with enemy ships before you can just send them out straight away without the need of a long range sortie happening. And you can then send them out to either a friendly target, an enemy target, or a mine token within 20". Now let's start off resolving what happens if it's sent to an enemy target. If it is sent onto an enemy target, it is called an attack run, and it is resolved during the end phase of the round. The end phase happens after the activation phase is done, and so it happens when all of the units in or on the table have activated. Now, before you do your attack run though, you have to give your opponent an option to intercept. When can an intercept happen? Well, if the attacked model by your SRS has any of their SRS tokens in base-to-base contact with it, they can attempt an intercept. However, they can also use a rule called scramble, and then they can that means that the ship being directly targeted by the attack runs, by the enemy SRS, that ship doesn't have any friendly tokens with it. However, a friendly target within 5" of the attack run target does. So those friendly SRS tokens can intercept, provided that they are not, of course, trying to defend against their own attack run. They're not going to abandon one ship only to save the other if it's being directly attacked. So they have to be available in a way to make that scramble attack. Now, making an intercept is fairly simple. You throw one die per SRS token that is attempting an intercept, and if you roll a counter, you move one or you remove one of the attacking SRS tokens. If you roll a heavy counter with one of those dice, you get to remove 2 of the attacking SRS tokens. Now, after those interceptions, sometimes via scrambles, are attempted, the attacking SRS resolve their attack. How do you do that? Well, you roll 2 dice for each regular SRS token and resolve it like you would for a shooting attack. However, you treat it as a shooting attack with the following profile, one that has aerial and piercing. That's against every target except for the submerged ones. Submerged targets cannot be targeted by aerial attacks, and so the attack reverts to being a submerged attack with piercing. Again, 2 dice, so that doesn't change. And of important note, the enemy does get to use their air defense value, because it's an aerial attack, or the submerged defense value if your attack has become submerged because your target was a submarine, essentially. And you have to take one important thing into account. If you're performing an attack run with tokens that were sent out on combat air patrol, so long range sortie at the start of the game, the enemy sees it coming from a mile away, so they get to double their air defense value to protect you against that attack. So that's the thing to be mindful of. There's a reduced efficiency by using that unlimited range rule from the get-go. Now that's how you resolve the enemy, or rather the attacking target. Suppose that you sent your SRS tokens to a friendly target. Well, of course, I'll handle the right hand side of this first. During the end phase they can attempt their intercepts. We've covered this. However, they can also be used during the activation step, so when the ships are actually performing their thing. And you can do so by discarding the SRS tokens, and you gain a bonus for them doing so. One of those bonuses can be +1 air defense value if the friendly target you send your SRS to is being attacked by an aerial weapon. You can only do 1 extra defense die though per SRS token, so it's not exactly the most economical way of getting extra air defense, but if you're particularly worried about an attack, better safe than sorry. Or, and this can be a real kicker, you can get 1 extra die if that friendly ship that you sent your SRS to is performing or is being attacked by an assault action. Especially when it is performing an assault action, it can really turn up to be quite nasty if you send in a bunch of SRS tokens to a ship that you plan to assault with next, so always keep that option in mind. Now, if you send out your SRS tokens to a mine token, that's also an option. This is through the SRS mine clearance rule. You can roll your dice at the end of the special operations step. Now, that's pretty much right after you place them, in other words. And those SRS tokens will attempt to blow up the mine token before your ship gets to move, in other words, so they can clear a path, if you will. And how do you resolve it? Well, you roll a number of dice equal to the number of SRS tokens that you send out to that mine token. For instance, if you send out all 4 of them, for a cruiser variant for instance, you would roll 4 of those dice. And if any of them results in an exploding hit, that mine token is done, it's gone, it's taken off the board without it doing any damage. And that's essentially what you can do with SRS tokens in a nutshell. Now, it's a lot to unpack, I know, but that's why we are doing that little video at the end. And one final note, there's always a chance that you send out your SRS token to an enemy target or to a friendly target, and that friendly target or enemy target gets blown sky high during the activation phase. If you have any SRS tokens that are wandering around without a target because this happened, they can try to find a new target at the start of the end phase. That new target has to be within 5 inches of their current position. So if you find them wandering somewhere in the middle of the sea and there's no one nearby within 5 inches of them, they're just gone. They can't do anything useful. However, if there is an enemy target or even a friendly target that they can hop onto, you can do so if that ship was destroyed. That's always important to remember, because you can trigger a cascade of different things through that scramble rule. For instance, you find yourself without a target, you see that there's a friendly ship within 5 inches, do move it towards that friendly ship, because you can then scramble to try and intercept within a 5-inch bubble of that ship you have now moved to, which can lead to some interesting gameplay. Now, enough of my waffling, I'll show you how it's done in a small little video. Right, let's do a bit of a gameplay example using these SRS tokens. Now they are used during the activation phase when a ship is launching them in its special operation phase, which means you have to launch them before anything can happen. Before your movement, before anything. Now, let's start off with this Enlightened flagship, which has special SRS tokens, i.e. 3, because it carries those. Those special SRS tokens, however, can only be launched at enemy targets up to 18 inch, and as you can see, there are no enemy targets available to it. So, this ship has no option but to send its special SRS tokens out on a long-range sortie. So the whale tokens will be set aside to the back of the board or on the unit card if you have it, to show what it has done. And of course, after that, this ship is going to be moving, and traditionally with the particle beamers you want to get as close as possible, so we can imagine this ship to move forwards quite a bit in an attempt to start shooting something. I'm not going to resolve the shooting, that's not really the point of this video. Next up, of course, one of the ships from the Imperium gets to activate, and we can, for instance, take the Conrad over here that can send out its SRS tokens to any target within 20 inches. Now, does it have any targets within 20 inches? In this case, it essentially can send it SRS tokens to this ship, to the enemy Plinius, but also towards these smaller targets found here. And as it can send out 4 SRS tokens, it chooses to attack them onto this frigate. Now this doesn't do anything yet, it gets resolved at the very end of the phase during the resolution step, but its SRS tokens have been sent out, and it is now, of course, drifting forwards and might actually take a small turn, etc, to avoid colliding with this thing. That's that unit activated and its SRS tokens sent out on a mission. Then it is, of course, the turn for the Covenant player. He can, for instance, now activate the Plinius. Now he sends out the SRS tokens before anything else. Can now opt to go for a bit of an offensive action, because as you can see, there's plenty of targets to choose from within 20 inch of it. He can choose to either send out the SRS tokens on an offensive mission, or he can choose to send them out to protect his own frigate in this case. And because this is the point of the video, let's actually try and mimic that he's also sending out his 4 SRS tokens that he has on an Intercept to make sure that that Marian frigate survives to see another day. Now, imagine that all of this goes on. The next player gets to activate. It's going to be the big guy here, the Imperium ship. Now, before it moves, it can send out its SRS tokens to anything within 20 inch. Now, he's just shy of the frigates, as you can see, but he can, for instance, send them out, all 8 of them, and technically you form one giant stack when you do, and send out an attack run on that Plinius that has just sent out its SRS tokens in defense. And I probably forgot to move as well, so we can just move that one up to make sure that it has activated. And then the final units to send out, as for instance these small frigates, they move up the board, they start shooting, blam blam blam. Now imagine if they had shot this guy, right, and they managed to take him clean off the board. That means that these SRS tokens do not have a target anymore to make their resolve against. All the other ones, if everything has done its thing, you know, these move up, etc. The SRS tokens, they stay here. They have to find a new target for them to move to. Now they can do so when the end phase happens to relocate within 5 inch of where they are. Technically, that means that these guys, it depends on who has initiative, of course. Imagine that the Imperium player, now we started with the Enlightened player, he was the one with the initiative. He can then go like, okay, I'm sending my tokens here. The Imperium player thinks, I'm going to be a cheeky little bastard. I'm going to move my things here. There you go, you send your tokens to the wrong target. Now, the SRS end resolution phase begins. The Imperium player gets to choose which one of these that he resolves first. And when he does so, you can for instance do this big stack of 8. This model doesn't have a friendly SRS tokens to try and intercept these tokens, but it does have a friendly target within 5 inch of itself that has no SRS tokens attacking it. So the Imperium player can attempt, the Enlightened player, can attempt to intercept these with those SRS tokens, attempt that interception. If he wants to attempt that interception, he sent in 4 tokens to do so. You roll 4 dice. He managed to score 2 heavy counters, which means that this stack of 8 has now been drastically reduced to only be a stack of 4. But, of course, these tokens are now destroyed. They were not able to try and intercept on this one. They were not able to try and intercept, well, they did an intercept on the other one. Now, that means that this attack, after the intercept gets resolved, there's 4 tokens. You throw 2 dice per token, and you just resolve this as if it were a shooting attack. It's not a particularly effective shooting attack so far, but he gets to roll 1 critical dice extra. That's nothing as well, and that causes 5 hits in this case, which then this ship gets to defend against. And I don't know it exactly off the top of my head, but I think an Enlightened ship has 3 defenses. He rolls, knocks off 1. Those 4 hits aren't going to do anything, and that attack was effectively counteracted because he no longer had enough dice to protect him. However, the attack is still coming through on the other one, and the Imperium player gets to roll, again, it's 4 tokens, 8 dice again to try and intercept it. Those 8 dice, let's see if this rolls any better for them. That's a bit better already. Oh, this was a critical hit. You of course get to roll your extra dice on it. Yet another, that means you can throw again, and that's about all the damage it does for the Imperium player. Now, of course, this guy gets to defend. He normally only has an air defense value of 2, but he's got a squad member close by, giving him an extra die. If the defense roll is made, it results in a single counter being thrown. That might have been just off screen, I don't know. But if he takes off that 1 hit, you're still left with 10 hits. Now, these are piercing attacks, meaning if they breach the armor, they already cause a critical hit. And Mass 1 ships can't take critical hits whatsoever, so this effectively destroys that guy and is taken off the board. And of course, these SRS tokens, they have done their job. They return to the main ship to do their thing again, to rearm and refuel. The ones that are intercepted are also just sent back to the ship and are replenished as the battle goes on, so you don't have to worry about that. You get your full capacity every single turn.
Right, and before we close off, I want to end this with a bit of a last closing thoughts things about SRS and their point in the game, because I quite often get comments saying like, I can't make the most out of SRS tokens, they seem to underperform quite a lot, they seem expensive for what they are, and well, you have to keep in mind that your SRS have some great utility in your fleet. Some of the instances are cycling through your Victory and Valor cards. That can actually be one of the best things that can happen. You can use them defensively. The option to use them to make 1 super assault can also be very, very tempting, and something you should definitely experiment with when you're using SRS tokens, because if you're a new player and you're just using your SRS or special SRS, as a mere attacking tool, you're always going to feel like they absolutely suck, because they fall woefully short compared to what other frontline ships can do. They don't have a lot. Well, they got a lot of things going against them, is what I should say. There's very late timing. The attack run happens at the end of the round. So if your idea is to just debuff or knock the efficiency out of an enemy ship before it can activate, there's no options to do that with SRS. You're also not really throwing a lot of dice out there. If you consider a ship, a Mass 2 ship, a typical one like a Konrad or a Pravda or a Roanoke, those sorts of ships, you're only getting 8 dice in your offense. That is for ships that are around the 120 points mark. That is laughably poor, even for a frontline ship that is just a monitor. So you're not going to get a lot out of them. Your opponent can respond to them as well, and then there's the range issues as well associated with them, because you have to activate them at the start of the turn. So as a purely offensive tool for attack runs, they have way too much going against them. I suppose the one thing they have got going for them is their great ability to hunt Mass 1 ships down due to piercing. Now, Mass 1 ships are being tweaked across the board. That element can become a lot more, a major element in the future, because, well, with the recent Orbats, we're seeing some mighty scary Mass 1 ships that pack more and more firepower. So who knows, this might evolve to become a bigger issue than it currently is. But right now, SRS as an attacking tool got a lot of issues. And in gameplay, this is sort of reflected, because when I field any carrier SRS ships, I'm treating them almost as if they are assault bolts, trying to close the gap with the enemy as quick as possible so I can get the most out of those SRS tokens. Because if you have to send them out on a long-range sortie, your ship is mostly sat there doing nothing for a turn. And in a game where the first 2 or 3 turns are just so crucial for the whole flow of the game, that's a luxury you can't really afford right now in the way the game unfolds. And that means that if I'm looking at these things, thinking about them, these hybrid ships, and I'm thinking about things like the HMS Ark Royal, like 3 front-facing heavy gun batteries with heavy magazines, and then a nifty little 10 SRS tokens stacked on top, lots of armor, lots of hull points, lots of citadel. That one can act like a battleship and have its SRS tokens near to the enemy, and that functions just fine in my book. The different Ice Maiden variants, same deal. You get a lot of guns and then some nifty little SRS tokens stacked onto it. That works. The Descartes, with its special killer whale tokens, still has 3 particle beamers on there and lots of armor. That works. Okinawa Squadrons, those are the Japanese ones with the 2 heavy front-facing heavy gun batteries and 2 SRS tokens. It's reduced. The full squadron of them still sends out 6. That just works in the game because closing that gap is not a big deal. And when you consider the points cost of these things and how little you have to actually pay to get those SRS tokens, it's fine. The problem, I think, lies in those pure flagships. And I'm thinking ships like a Tempelhof, the new Suleiman, the new Enterprise in the recent Orbats. These are all remarkably cheap for what are supposed to be Mass 4 dreadnoughts. And they have to be, because offensively they keep falling a bit short compared to traditional frontline ships. I mean, if I take the Tempelhof for instance, as an example, that one gets to throw out 8 SRS tokens. That's a maximum of 16 dice, and you have to get up close into your opponent's face to launch that. On a ship platform, that falls short in terms of armor, in terms of citadel, and in terms of hull points. And it's roughly the same cost as an Elector class. And the Elector class has no issues whatsoever to get to those 18 dice if it wants to. Those 16 dice even, if it wants to. It just outperforms it across the board. So you're down with that very first point on this slide. You take those for the great utility they have, and again, that is only useful up until a certain point. 8 SRS is probably a bit of overkill then. A Suleiman is only 260 points for a massive 10 SRS tokens, but again, that's just 20 dice on the offensive. That's not that great, and that ship still has to act kind of weirdly by closing the gap and being used as an assault boat, at which point it's going to be shot up from all sides by the enemy, and it's just a tough position to be in. Same with the Enterprise. That's a max of 24 dice. As an offensive tool, that just doesn't quite work. And it has some perverse other effects as well. Like I'm seeing at the Union draft that they've got going now. You've got the Enterprise at 290 points, bringing you a nifty 12 SRS tokens. And then the Roanoke sitting there around 120 point mark. And you'd be thinking, like, what's the point of ever taking 3 Roanoks when there's an Enterprise as well? The same with the Constantinople and the Suleiman. There's just no point to consider it taking two of those Constantinoples when there's a Suleiman within the same fleet, giving you access to an extra commandery role and all of that stuff. Now, these pure flagships are a bit too cheap for what they are, and the reason for that is the exact same reason I think that flagships in a very early iteration of the game were just not worth taking. That was until that heavy magazine rule came up. Suddenly, those flagships were actually using their weapons more efficiently than the normal ships were, than the cruisers were. And I think it might be worth considering tagging a similar type of rule onto these big flagships. Something that allows them to just sit in the back and keep peppering your opponent with SRS tokens, which is more in line with how I expect carriers to function in a naval battle. I'm not a naval battle expert, but I can definitely, consider that a carrier isn't exactly the thing that just goes straight up to the shoreline to be able to do its thing. And maybe they need a rule, like, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, complex operations, where they can always send out their SRS tokens as if they were on long-range sortie. So leave the smaller ships with the combat air patrol rule, but upgrade that one to like complex operation, like ships being able to both take off and land because you've got huge platforms to do so, allowing your SRS tokens to always optionally be sent out as if it were on long-range sortie. Maybe that would help, because right now I think they're in a bit of an awkward spot. So if you're a beginning player, don't just leave SRS alone, because they do bring amazing things to you up until a certain point, but don't ever think that making a fleet with lots of SRS tokens, or carriers rather, is going to function, because it's just going to be shot apart by frontline squadrons, which isn't what you want either. So, thanks for listening. I hope this video was useful to you, and if you thought it was useful, remember, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!